Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intelligence Brief, where we give you what the best that we showed you this week, because I know everybody doesn't get a chance to watch every show. So we might make sure that you don't miss any of the important things that really mattered during the week. And this week was certainly no exception. A lot of things were going on, a lot of things we covered. I want to start off right off the bat with Andrei Martyanov, who was trying to explain to us what the situation was regarding the allegations that Trump can gain some leverage over Vladimir Putin in some negotiation once he comes into power on January 20th because of this escalation of long-range missiles by the Biden administration, this flooding the zone with like $6 to $8 billion and, as many dollars as they can get and weapons they can get before the end. Because as you may recall, some people were saying, hey, that's tying Trump's hands. That's going to cause him problems because that could potentially escalate the war before January 20th. But others were saying, no, that's actually going to help. In fact, General Kellogg, Trump's advisor, actually, as you'll see in the start of this following clip here, he came out and said, no, this is actually going to help Trump. And we wanted to ask Andre what he thought of it.
When you look at what's happened, you've got the North Koreans involved by providing troops, you've got the Iranians involved, you've got the Chinese involved, and you've got the Russians involved. So the makeup of the war has expanded, and it's time we kind of put it back in a box, not only for American security, but for global security as well. Yeah. So I don't have a problem with what they've done. It's all based on leverage. The president understands that, and he's going to use it to his advantage.
First, there will be no freezing. There will be some kind of negotiations. Let Kellogg come to Moscow and pretend that he has anything to offer. The combined West has nothing to offer, and it is not between Russia and Ukraine. It is between Russia and NATO, period. Ukraine is a virtual state with demolished armed forces. It's not the force which it was even in the beginning of the 2022. Which at that time was indeed the strongest European army. It was strongest NATO army. It was stronger than Turkey. Well, we know the result. And so now it is about, and again, it's Moscow and Washington, period. These are the two deciders. It's just a matter of how Washington wants to arrange and save its own face. But in this case, you will have to have much more serious people than Kellogg, talking to Russians.
What so many people have said is that, and the hope is, especially of those who were in Trump's orbit, that his great negotiating skills and his history of being able to negotiate good things is going to give him this ability to go into Putin or to Sergei Lavrov, whoever ends up doing the negotiations, that he can come up with a really good deal that's going to be good for the Kiev. It's going to be good for Zelensky. That's kind of the thought. But here's the problem with that is let's just give Trump his due, and that he is a good negotiator and that he does know how to make deals. But in order to come up with a good negotiated deal, you have to have leverage, and just flooding the zone with a whole bunch more bombs and bullets and tanks and whatever else. I don't know if there's any tanks in this bill, but whatever the issues are, long range missiles, I'm sure, interceptor missiles, I think were specifically part of it. Just throwing a bunch of that stuff into Ukraine is not going to give you leverage. Because if that was the case, then when we gave them, thousands of military vehicles prior to the 2023 offensive and the millions of rounds of ammunition, then that would have changed the tide then, and it didn't do anything. And if money and flooding the zone would have worked into $61 billion we allocated earlier this year, most of which is long since gone in there, would also have made a big difference. It made none, zero. So we need to, first of all, just get the reality into our minds here that this, whatever Biden has shoved out the door, will make this much difference in the outcome of the war. So it will not give Trump any leverage at all. And in fact, because of these terrible policies that our administration has enacted over the last nearly 3 years, because of our failure to acknowledge ground truth reality, Trump is going to enter this with a very small hand. It's trying to play high stakes poker, and you look in your hand, you got a bunch of 3s and 5s, maybe a deuce in there. And you think you're going against somebody with a bunch of face cards and somehow you're going to win. There's no bluff in a situation like that. When this other side knows that they have all the heavy cards and they know that you don't have the cards, then you're not going to be able to negotiate something to their disadvantage. That's just the truth of it. We just need to be sober on that, is that, we need to have proper expectations. and that Trump is going to come in, and I'm sure he's going to do what he said he would do during the election, and that is to try to reach a negotiated settlement. And I'm sure he'll do everything he can to come up with a plan that's going to put as good a face on it as he can, and he will try to get the best deal he can. And it's not that he doesn't come in with any leverage. It's not that he has no cards. He does have some cards, and if they're played well, then he can get something that's modestly good for the West, good for the United States, and the best you can get. I won't go so far as to say there's any good deal to have for Ukraine, not at this point, but there are worse ones that can be done. So hopefully that he'll be able to negotiate something that's beneficial to them. But Martyanov is also correct in that it's not going to be Kiev and Washington and Brussels, London, Paris, and Moscow. It's going to be Washington and Moscow. That's the only two players that make any difference. Everybody in Europe is going to do whatever we say. They have been that way for decades, and there's no reason to think they're going to be any different with Trump. Actually, as we're making this show right now, Trump is in Paris right now talking to Emmanuel Macron, and I'm very sure that this topic will be high on the agenda about what we're going to get done. And I'm pretty sure that behind closed doors, they'll be talking realistically. From folks that I know on Trump's team, that's usually what he does behind the scenes. He's very boisterous in front of the cameras, but behind the scenes, he's pretty pragmatic. So I imagine that's probably going on in Paris as we speak right now. Next, we had the situation is in the Middle East, as though it wasn't roiled enough with all of the tenuous ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon, the still ongoing war in the Gaza Strip, and the still the ever possibility that Iran makes good on its previous threat to do something against Israel in response to what the last Israeli strike there. On top of all that, now all of a sudden things in Syria are starting to fall apart. And Bashar al-Assad's group, which weathered a civil war from 2011 to roughly 2018, 2020, somewhere, which kind of stabilized, and it looked like they had kind of weathered that storm. It looks like they took their eye off the ball and quit paying attention and just kind of tried to breathe a little too easy, too long. And now all of a sudden, unbeknownst to them, there was this rebel group and these violent extremist groups led by HTS have risen up, and all of a sudden out of nowhere launched this attack, first of all, onto the city of Aleppo. And then after having taken it with almost no resistance, even though it took Syria 4 years of horrible conflict to actually seize, these guys almost just rolled in and took it over. Well, that was bad, but then, all right, well, now people are paying attention. But then, yikes, they kept on going. And then they went into Hama, and then now they're heading towards Homs, et cetera. And they're just continuing to roll south, and the Syrian group continues to fall back. They haven't had these big clashes where the Syrian army has been defeated. They have just continued to withdraw and move closer to Damascus. And in fact, there's some reports out just this morning that the rebels have now moved closer and are within, in some areas, 10 kilometers from the outside of Damascus, which is a shocking turn of events and just an amazing. And so it's actually true that the Assad regime is literally on the brink of collapse. It's shocking how fast all of these things are coming to bed, and it exposes a lot of weakness within the Syrian army, within the Syrian government. No one had a very high opinion of them at first, but I don't think many people had this low of an expert understanding of what was going on. So to try to understand some of what was going on, we had one of our popular guests, former CIA analyst Mike Domino, to come on and try to explain to us a little bit about what's going on.
Syria has been totally destabilized, really because we couldn't acknowledge the fact that things are a little bit more complex under the surface than we want to allow. And the last thing I'll say on this is the NSC under Biden just yesterday, they didn't talk about this for a week. Then they put out a boilerplate press release where they acknowledged some of the events, but they went out of their way to say that the U.S., is not involved here. And I think, you know me, Danny, I've been incredibly critical of the Biden administration. I guess I'll give them a little credit for acknowledging in this press release that HTS is a terrorist organization. And Jake Sullivan seems to be trying to have his cake and eat it too, because back in 2012, it's great, let's work with these guys. Now he's talking about the exact same people on the Sunday shows yesterday, and Jake Sullivan is saying, whoa, these are terrorists, and so we're not really sure if this is good for the United States right now or whatever. And this is really U.S. foreign policy in the region in a nutshell. You make these broad sweeping moves, and then you sort of find yourself on the total opposite end of them 10 years later.
So the United States needs to try and figure out what it wants to do. It sounds like that they're scrambling because they've been caught, not paying attention to this. There's been so many things, in all honesty, for them to pay attention to in the Middle East, and what things are like inside Syria, what we're going to do with that, et cetera. It's not probably even been on the radar, much less at the top of the list. But now it is. And so we have to decide what we're going to do. But listen, let's understand something. There are so many people in the foreign policy blob in America that thinks if there's conflict going on anywhere in the Middle East or nearly anywhere else, except for maybe Africa, we don't care so much about Africa, I guess. But especially in the Middle East, if it's there, then we need to do something. We don't need to do something. It's not our fight. This is not anything that we need to do. In fact, the absolute first number one priority is to get our troops out of Syria. There's allegedly somewhere around 900. I'm guessing the number is actually higher than that, especially when you add contractors in, because there's a number of bases that we have in Syria do nothing for us. As I have been screaming since 2019, they do nothing but form a strategic vulnerability for the United States. It gets some of our people killed. We've already had some killed in Jordan this year that were just over the border from Syria. Some were wounded just a couple of days ago. That don't seem to get much notice anywhere. But all we're doing, any time an American gets especially killed, then the president, whoever it is, feels compelled to take action against the perpetrators, et cetera. And it just gets us potentially drawn further into a war. Those troops do absolutely nothing for us. And just look at what's going on the ground right now. Our troops have been there. Did they do anything to stop this? Did they do anything to bring any peace to the situation? They didn't even have a role to play. They don't have one. And this alleged anti-ISIS situation is just a fiction, because that's like saying I'm going to drain a swimming pool with an eyedropper on a rainy day. It's you can fill that eyedropper all day long, and you can take out individual people here and there. But there is a vast country of Syria, and you have a tiny handful of troops there, most of whom are there to defend the bases, et cetera. So there's just a fraction of the troops that actually do anything, and it's inconsequential. It means nothing. Whether they take some out, whether they take none out, it does nothing for American national security. So quit putting our troops in harm's way and risking their lives and their security and their health over something that doesn't even matter one way or the other. So that's the first thing that needs to be done. Get our troops out of there right now. I know that Biden's not going to do it, but what they should do before Trump gets in, take the troops out of there. And I know people will say, oh, well, that'll look like we're running away. People will say that, no doubt about it. I'm sure that Iran will say that. I'm sure that some of these violent groups will say it. Syria will say it. Whatever. They're going to say whatever they're going to say. That should not keep us from doing something that makes sense for us. This is what we need to do. We need to do something that's going to make sense for America. But too often we just say, well, we've been there forever, so we can't. No, we can. If they want to crow, that's fine. But then now our troops are out of harm's way, and our security is increased because now we're not vulnerable, and having these people out there that could draw us into a war, that's now deprived. It's harder for our enemies to attack us in. So it makes enormous sense across the board. It should be done immediately. Now, secondly, what should be done about the situation in Syria? We should do whatever we can to make sure it's contained to Syria and doesn't expand out anywhere else to any of our allies or friends in the region. And that's it. That's it. And then we can help with humanitarian food or something else to these people in Syria. We can do, those kinds of things. We can offer diplomatic help to any of the sides that may want it. I doubt that they will, but that's it. We don't need to do something because there's violence going on, folks. This has been going on for many decades, for centuries, if you want to get, down to it and keep going down the path. These things are going on, whether we're there, whether we're not. It's going to go on beyond this, whether we're there, whether we're not. It's just not going to make any difference. So let's just get our troops out of the harm's way, remove the vulnerability to America, and then the situation plays out however it's going to play out. I know that goes against the grain of many people, but let me point this out. The last point I want to make on this, it won't matter if you do something or not. It's not going to change the outcome. You're not going to fix anything. So if those who say, no, we can't leave, we can't keep our hands off because X, Y, and Z, it ain't going to matter. whatever they do choose to do, whatever we have done for decades, hasn't had any impact. I mean, don't forget, Obama was famously funding all these alleged moderate rebel groups, and some from the CIA, some from the Pentagon, et cetera. And you may remember many of those groups end up turning on each other, and they will turn, allegiances in a dime if it means their benefit to do so. And those who are for us today are against us tomorrow, but they'll take all of our money and weapons all day long. It doesn't make any difference. It didn't solve anything. It just maybe helped the body count for the various sides by arming them. So don't do it. It's been a disaster every time we've tried. It'll be a disaster if we do anything this time. Move on. Okay, and so we're going to move on too. Next, we have Alexander Mercurius, who was on talking about the situation back in Ukraine, where he's one of the best voices. Love having him on the show. And he was looking at the Zelensky claim that he can compel Russia into a deal beneficial to Kiev. That got my interest up. And so I asked Alexander what he thought about it. Upon what leverage does anyone in the West think that the Ukraine side is going to have when I assure you there is no such shortage of equipment, ammunition, anything else on the Russian side?
Well, this is exactly it. I mean, that is exactly the point. I mean, by Zelensky's own admission, he is critically short of weapons. There are lots of articles now that appear all across the media in the West, in Ukraine itself, by the way, about the fact that Ukraine is now critically short of men as well. So given that this is so, this is not going to reverse tomorrow. It's not going to reverse next month or next year. It cannot reverse because Zelensky was asked, why aren't they giving you these weapons? It's because there are inevitably always limitations on capacity, a fact which Starmer, Ruta, all of these other people never ever acknowledge, which is another problem, by the way. So we can't just reverse this situation. The Russians are able to produce weapons at a vast scale, not just because they have a strong industrial base, which they do, stronger at least than we ever told ourselves that they had, but because for them, this is a critically important war. It's about something that Russian society cares collectively about, and they're prepared to make sacrifices over, even if that means experiencing higher prices and those sort of things. If $61 billion is what we can provide, which was what we provided in May, it didn't change the situation then. $725 million, which is what you've just shown me, isn't going to change the situation now. And if there were huge numbers of weapons that we had in abundance that we could send to Ukraine, that would turn the situation and re-equip all those brigades that Zelensky is talking about and change the situation on the front lines, we would have done it. If we haven't done it now, the reality is that we never will.
And listen, folks, it's just math. It's math. You see Gary showing there on the screen, they have a second batch of F-16 fighters. Okay. And what do they think that's going to do? What did the first batch do? Nothing. And now then you see, one of the things the Ukraine now is saying in this really slick made for TV moment here, that they have a drone industry that they're providing lots of drones, which are not unimpressive actually, but just, this is how they operate. You see, this looks like a scene from a movie. I mean, with dramatic lighting, dramatic angles, and coming up and making these things look really cool. I mean, okay, so they have all these. Have you seen any kind of, devastation on the Russian side from these drones? I mean, those obviously aren't new. They got a bunch of them. Where's the impact on the ground? Where's the impact on the battlefield? It's not, because Russia has exceptional electronic warfare and air defense capabilities. So hardly any of these things actually get through. You may remember, I think it was last month, when the biggest drone strike of the war by the Ukraine side into Moscow, or went into Russia towards Moscow and several other locations, none of them got through. All of them were either shot down or diverted with electronic warfare means and just fell into empty fields. That's just the truth of it. And it's a math problem. I mean, you can even forget about all the weapon systems. It's a manpower issue. Ukraine has lost, God only knows how many actual people. They're publicly saying it's somewhere around 100,000. Many reports have it much higher, and I think it probably is much higher. We may never know, but we know the number's huge. Then 500,000 or more wounded seriously on top of that. and are no longer able to go back into the fighting. And millions have fled the country, and over 100,000 officially have deserted. And we know the number is almost certain to be higher in that category as well. And they just don't have a lot of men to bring in. And it doesn't matter how many you bring in, even if they said, yeah, we're going to lower the age to 18, we're going to bring all these guys in there, another 300,000, 400,000. That's not how armies work. That's not how war works, folks. That's like saying, I'm going to bring in 300,000 privates. And you can't fight a war with privates. You have to have sergeants. You have to have first sergeants, sergeants major. You have to have lieutenants, captains, majors, lieutenant colonels, generals, etc. And every one of those takes from 3 to 5 to 15 to 20 years to build. You have to generate them. There's no shortcut for that. There's no NATO training base that can turn a company commander that needs 5 to 7 years of experience in a 4-month training period, if they even get that, and hardly ever do they. All you're going to do is get a bunch of privates who have this. It's like an inch deep all the way across. No one knows how to fight. All they know how to do is this, go into positions and die in large numbers. So there is no possibility for Ukraine will ever turn the thing around. They will never do it. There's no capacity to do it, manpower or equipment wise. So the only rational thing to do is get a settlement on the best terms you can get. I say that all the time. But that moment has come, and no matter how many slick videos Zelensky makes, it's not going to change the outcome. Trump is coming. He is going to make a negotiated settlement on whatever terms he can get. And then the question is going to be, what kind of terms can he get? Because Trump has a limited amount of leverage. And we'll see how that plays out with the Russian side. Just as long as we can get through this without any escalation, as long as there are no more long-range weapons fired by the U.S. side into Russia, that could prompt them to respond in a stronger way than they have, even with the Soreshnik that they did before, then there's every reason to think that Trump can come in and get the war over with. And whatever the terms are, if the war stops, then that's great for the people of Ukraine who were still alive. And it starts to give them finally the clock starts on a future. Now then they can start the process of healing, of rebuilding, of regrowing generations of men that have been lost. But we all need to have a sober eye on what that means. We're talking generations of time to rebuild that. We're not talking a handful of years. We're not even talking about a decade. It's going to be a multiple decade process to undo all the damage that's been done here. But that process can't even start until we have first a ceasefire and then any kind of negotiated settlement. So for the people of Ukraine, I pray that happens very soon. Last thing we want to talk about in this one here is something that's actually in the news today. And one of the things that I have been warned about since 2018, one of my biggest concerns is that the Iranian side is now getting closer and closer to having the kind of nuclear material that can lead to a nuclear weapon. When we got out of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal in 2018, I thought that was the biggest mistake we'd made. I understand that Trump didn't like it. Many of his backers didn't like it. That the Obama deal that had been made in 2015 had flaws in it. Without question, it did. But it was also largely effective. It dramatically reduced the stockpiles of nuclear material that Iran had. It moved a lot of it out of the country. It put a substantial number of IAEA weapons inspectors inside their country in very intrusive ways. Again, it wasn't perfect. There were some areas where they might have had some possibility to do some things, but they didn't. And the areas where these inspectors was very, very well covered and very well monitored. And we knew almost everything they were doing. Now then, since that time, all the constraints that we had on them have begun to whittle off over time. And then they started increasing the amount of nuclear processed material they had. Then they started increasing the refined levels of it. I think it was something like 3% or something like that when we got out of the JCPOA. Today, according to this report here by the IAEA, it's up to 60%, and that's increasing as well. There's more of it. And it's near weapons grade. Just a difference between 60 and 90% sounds kind of big, but apparently in the way that these things are done, it's really, really close. It's a lot closer than it sounds. And with a decision, they can move. And here's my concern. It's always been my concern. It's even more so now. that if Iran concludes that they are powerless against Israel attacks and American attacks, then they may conclude that the only thing they have left is to have a weapons program. As of today, the U.S. intelligence reports today still say that they have no evidence that Iran has made a decision to have a nuclear weapons program. So apparently there still isn't one. But we see they're taking all the steps necessary that if they make that decision, they could have enough material for a nuclear weapon within a week, according to the latest intel brief, and that they could have that probably mated to a delivery system within a month or two. And of course, that assumes that we actually can find it. If they take this material somewhere where it can't be seen, then they may be able to have that mated with a device, and all of a sudden we see a nuclear test is the first evidence we have, or a missile gets tested that has the capacity. So we have claimed all along that we got out of the JCPOA, and that all these, now nearly 4 years of the Biden administration, they've continued all this pressure on Iran because we don't want them to get nuclear weapons. We'll never allow them to have nuclear weapons. And yet everything we have done has pushed them in a direction to have nuclear weapons. We have not provided any incentive for them to say, all right, we're going to keep it not, and we're going to move in a direction away from it. The rational thing to do would have been to say, all right, where do we have common ground here? Where can we work with you guys so that you can have confidence that you can provide your own security without nuclear weapons, and that we're not going to do anything to regime change or any of that kind of stuff? When they see all the time on all these American networks, all these hawks all the time talking about John Bolton, let's have a regime decapitation. You have Naftali Bennett saying destroy the head of the octopus, etc. All these people keep saying yes, that's what we should do. And then the last Israeli attack into Iran showed that they can penetrate their air defenses in some key areas and apparently at least hit one of the nuclear research facilities, showing that, yeah, if we want to, we can take the whole thing out. At least that's the implication. So you're telling Iran, okay, if you're counting on conventional deterrence, it's gone. It doesn't work. So the only thing left is to go nuclear. Of course, that's a big jump for them, because if they get caught doing it before they have it, then they open themselves up to a devastating response. And then we have to get sucked into a war. So you see, the answer for us, the implications are that it would be bad or horrible. It would be bad if we get sucked into a conventional war, because if we suddenly one day find irrefutable evidence that they actually are trying to mate a nuclear weapon with nuclear material, then all of a sudden, there will be overwhelming pressure on any president, whether it's Biden or Trump, to take action. And you can be sure that the Israeli side will be cheering that on with all of their capacity that they have. And then all of a sudden, then we have this open-ended war, and God only knows where that could go. I've been telling you, it's everywhere from bad to horrible. There is no good outcome. There is no benefit to the United States. There's no long-term, no medium-term, no benefit to the U.S. Only negatives would come from that. And if they were able to successfully get a nuclear weapon before we could even find out, then you have a whole new problem, and you have the potential for nuclear exchange between Iran and Israel. And any nuclear weapon used anywhere in the world overnight dramatically changes the security environment for the globe. And by implication, obviously, for us. All that is bad for us, because now that once that nuclear genie gets out of the bottle of use, then it's going to cause terror and fear and panic across people all over the world. And people who have the weapons will be more inclined to use them. And, it only goes downhill from there. So what we need to do right now is not push this any further. Don't push Iran any further in a direction where they feel they have to. Let's give them incentive to back down from this, because that is beneficial for everybody, Israel included. Iran is no threat to Israel, no matter what rhetoric they've used about, wiping them off the map and whatever they've been saying for a long time. That's like a little 100-pound kid coming up to the, 250-pound muscle, big welterweight fighter and saying, I'm going to beat you up, man. Yeah, you're not going to. You don't have the capacity to. They don't have they can harm Israel. They cannot destroy it. And if they do ever take that action, then they will be annihilated. And they know that. So they certainly won't take that kind of action, as we've seen. They've been very, very reluctant to respond in kind to Israel already, perfectly providing evidence that they can be deterred by that threat. We don't need to go further. Don't push them too far, because that's not good for us. It's not good for Israel. It's not good for the region. It's not good for anybody. That's what we need to do. Let's keep things where they are, back it down, come off the ledge and don't press a bad situation, which could make it worse. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. By the way, also, you may have seen a lot of information in the news in the last day or so that 100 intelligence leaders are alarmed at Tulsi Gabbard's nomination to be the director of national intelligence. Well, I've done we're going to do a show this afternoon, rather, and you're going to see it here on the channel pop. I'm not sure exactly what time yet. Just watch the channel. We'll be promoting that. I'm going to tell you what the real story is behind that. And there's a dark truth that's behind the people who are saying this. And we're going to pull back the curtain, and you're going to see who's making these charges and the lies that they're telling about Tulsi Gabbard. And you'll see the truth later on this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Thanks very much for watching. Look forward to seeing you then on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.